to serve. I served on vestries as a layperson. I was a senior warden during a building project when we didn't have any money. And so I really do understand a lot of the challenges. Starting off with what Donald was just talking about, it strikes me that serving on a vestry or a bishop's committee is a combination of leadership, that vision, and management having to keep the current thing going. And some of the things that I'm going to discuss tonight, I think make it a little bit easier for you to do both of those things. So we will go ahead and start just a couple of definitional things. If you are a member of a parish, you serve on a vestry, and your wardens are the bishop's warden, or sorry, I said the wrong thing, the senior warden and the junior warden. If your congregation is a mission congregation, you serve on a bishop's committee, and you have a bishop's warden and, again, a junior warden. So you will hear those two terms. And if you're in an action plan parish, there's no telling what you're being called right now. So, but what I would say, what I would tell you is, from the position of the vestry member or member of a bishop's committee, I think the difference is really invisible to you. The work that you will be doing is the same whether you are in a big place or a small place. The scope of it might change, but you have similar responsibilities. The first thing that I would share with you is, hang on, let me share my screen. This is not the best looking PowerPoint thing you've ever seen. Would somebody give me a thumbs up that you can see fiduciary responsibilities?
Yes.
Thank you. You have, as a member of the vestry or a member of a bishop's committee, a duty of care and a duty of loyalty. And those are both really important. And you see, these are definitions from, Googling it. Duty of care is a requirement that you act toward others and the public with watchfulness, attention, caution, and prudence that a reasonable person in the circumstances would use. If you don't do that, you might be considered negligent, and damages could be claimed. We'll get back to that. You also have a duty of loyalty, which a duty of loyalty, you'll see, seeks to prevent you from acting against the best interests of the church. You should not be wheeling and dealing as a vestry member trying to get your brother-in-law the roofing contract, for example. So you have these two responsibilities. Because our churches have directors and officers insurance, if the vestry or bishop's committee was found to be negligent, you would not be personally liable. That is good news. So that's sort of the legal bit. What I'm going to spend the rest of our time together on, though, is what I think is what most people focus on when they think about being on the vestry or the bishop's committee. And if you ask someone, would you like to serve? The thing that they are going to be most worried about is the meeting. And they've got this vision of a vestry meeting that maybe people are shouting at each other, or it goes on until midnight, or nothing ever gets accomplished. and they don't want to be there. And I'm here to tell you that your vestry meeting does not have to be punishment for anyone involved. And there are a couple of tricks of the trade that makes it so that you can respect the members of your bishop's committee and make the best use of their time. First of all, start on time. Oh, please, please, please start the meeting on time. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. You know, if you live somewhere where everybody has to drive in on the freeway and the freeway's shut down, you're going to have to make an exception. But start on time. Because you know that if you start 5 minutes late, because Stanley always comes 5 minutes late, once you change the start time, he'll still come 5 minutes late. It's like a miracle. It works that way. So start on time. Start with prayer. It is super important. We are not the Rotary. I have nothing against the Rotary. I just use them as an example. We are the church doing God's work. And so starting with prayer and some sort of check-in so that you do not end up in a situation where you find out at the end of the meeting that someone's dog died that day and no one has had a chance to say something of comfort. So start on time, start with prayer. And then do all that you can to make your vestry meetings a strategic meeting rather than a recap of what you've already done. And you say, well, how? I'm going to show you. Here is a sample vestry agenda. Let me share my screen. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. All right. This is a sample agenda for St. Swithin by the Swing Sets Episcopal Church. The first important thing to have done is to have sent the agenda out in advance of the meeting. Even ideally, it's out 4 or 5 days prior to the meeting. Even just getting it out the morning of the meeting gets you going in the right direction. You will see opening prayer and check-in. Notice that I have times associated with all of these different activities. You might run over, but at least it has you working towards a schedule, and you can at least have an idea, are you scheduling a meeting that can actually be accomplished in the time frame that you have set aside? This is the most important part. You could unmute yourself for a moment. Does anyone's vestry or bishop's committee use a consent agenda?
At St. Margaret's, we're doing that. We have a new priest, and he is doing that.
Very good. Anyone else? Okay, Alan. I see Alan. And
what exactly is a consent agenda?
Well, I am going to share that with you now.
Okay.
What a consent agenda allows you to do is to send out pertinent information prior to the meeting that people get to review. So I have listed here what would go out as items to be included in the consent agenda. The minutes for the last meeting, the priest in charge report, the warden's reports, and then I just came up with a couple of committees, the outreach committee report, the worship committee report. All of those things are sent out in advance. Please read all consent agenda items in advance of meeting. When we get to the consent agenda, the question will be, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? And if the answer is yes, meaning no, there are no changes that anyone wants to make, there are no corrections, there are no questions, you can then say, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? So moved. Is there a second? Yes. And you say, you vote. All of these things don't have to be talked about in the course of the meeting, which saves you a colossal amount of time. And the beauty of the consent agenda is, if, for example, you saw something in the priest in charge report that you really wanted to talk about, you can say, I'd like to pull out the priest in charge report. That comes out of the consent agenda. And the rest of everything is approved with that out. And then you can listen to that part in person and ask questions and discuss it. Does that make sense to people? Are there any questions on that?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you can see, I mean, I've been to meetings where they read the minutes from the previous month's meeting aloud. And then people argued over whether that was what was said. I mean, that took 30 minutes. And, you know, that meeting went on for hours and everybody was not happy by the end of it. So the consent agenda really makes a difference. And it still allows you to know what's happening. All of these things should be reports on what has already taken place, so that you get the report on how the blessings in a bag outreach event went. Maybe you had a worship committee meeting where you determined that Christmas Eve services are changing to 7:30 and 11 p.m., which you know would be hauled out of the consent agenda. But anyway, you have a report from the junior warden who tells you that the bathrooms, the toilets have been replaced, whatever. So you're still up to date, but you're not having to discuss it. You'll notice, though, that I do not have the treasurer's report in the consent agenda. I think most churches need to see their finances each and every month and have a report from their treasurer telling them where they stand, a review of the financials, of the profit and loss, and of the balance sheet, questions and answers. How are we looking toward, compared to our budget year to date and year end? So I exhort you to not put the treasurer's report in the consent agenda. It's tempting, but it's unwise. And then just as a couple of examples, 725, planning for an upcoming parish-wide event. You can spend 25 minutes planning something exciting that's coming up. Beginning at 750. This month, I said, we'll talk about what we're going to do with the empty lot on the property. Next month, we'll talk about children's ministries. You can spend 25, 30 minutes on new and exciting leadership opportunities at your Bishops' Committee meeting. And then a recap of to-do items, the closing prayer at 8:30. Obviously, there are times when these sorts of numbers are unreasonable, and you might need to go longer than an hour and a half. What I have done is if our meeting time is, what was it, 7 to 8:30? If at 8:25 it looked like we were running over, we took a vote. We took a vote to agree to have that meeting run over. And then we would set a time. We're going to go until 9 o'clock. And then at 9 o'clock, if we weren't done, we'd take another vote. But at some point, everybody's tired and cranky and needs to go home, is my strong advice.
Gwynn,
Yes.
you set aside the treasurer's report. I've seen it both ways, to send out the treasurer's report out with all of the consent agenda so that everybody gets a chance to see it, but you still want the report.
Yes, thank you. I totally agree. The financials should go out in advance so that people can review them. I'm wary of then burying them in a consent agenda, though, where people then don't get to ask questions. Because so many vestry members are either nervous about numbers, or they just don't want to deal with it. And you start putting in the consent agenda, and the next thing you know, no one has looked at the finances in 7 months, which is a bad thing. Any other questions? Susan, you're muted. You're still muted. Well, if you are unable to unmute, you could type your question in the chat and I will look for it. Julie, yes. Again, you're muted. Do we have a setting that says you can't unmute?
No, I don't think so.
Just go down to your lower left corner. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Well, okay, now Julie's unmuted. Okay.
At the bottom of the chat list is a button to unmute me that was working when my other options were not.
Okay.
I'm here. I'm back again.
Okay. Let's
Susan.
start with Susan, Julie, and then I'll come to you.
Well, the other thing is, I always think that the vestry members are should be able to answer questions from people in the congregation too. So if they're thoroughly briefed, that's a good thing. Particularly in terms of the treasurer's report.
Agreed.
So I can see that as being broken out.
Thank you. Julie.
My one minor addition to this was that I found using a consent calendar in a previous congregation very helpful, and included the upcoming calendar as something to be consented, so that everybody had the upcoming events and the opportunity to address any conflicts of scheduling.
Yeah, I agree with that. Totally agree with that. It's worth the time.
I'm putting it in the chat too. So adding upcoming calendar and events and financial reports to materials sent in advance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Canon Lynch.
Excellent suggestions. In general, vestry meetings, bishops' committee meetings, are open to everyone in the congregation. The only time you would have to ask people to leave is if you were discussing a personnel issue. And then you would go into executive session. When you're in executive session, you don't take minutes and you don't pass resolutions. And whatever you discuss in that meeting is confidential. And there have been a couple of times in recent years where people have come out of executive council sessions or executive sessions and have talked about it. And that's just a real violation of your responsibilities as a member of the Bishops' Committee or Vestry. So I'll just mention that. So there's a format for being able to have Bishops' Committee meetings or Vestry meetings that are strategic and not just a recap of what you've done. The other thing that I think is essential to a good meeting is also establishing meeting behavioral norms.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And those are going to change based on your congregation, because not everyone has the same set of issues. These are the ones that I recommend. And it's good to have a session where you, as a group, agree to these norms, whatever yours end up being. Confidentiality, and I just talked about executive sessions, but I mean, the vestry meeting is open, and so there's nothing secret about it, but going out and telling everybody everything that happened at the vestry meeting is inappropriate. No crosstalk. Let one person talk at a time. No chit chat with your neighbor. Avoid that. I have had to help vestries with things like no yelling, which you would hope is not necessary, but sometimes it is. We're not going to yell at each other. One place that I was working with ended up with a norm of no sarcasm, because sarcasm had been used as a weapon in the past, and they wanted to acknowledge it. Your Bishops' Committee might not have that issue. Yours might be everybody talks at once, or but whatever those norms are, it is really important for you as a group to come together and to make those promises to one another, how you are going to relate to one another. And I would urge you to always remember our baptismal covenant and to respect the dignity of every human being at the meeting and outside the meeting. You should not be bad-mouthing your fellow vestry members. And please, please, please don't go out into the parking lot and have the secondary meeting. Parking lot meetings will destroy a church as fast as anything else. You've got a meeting, and so avoid those parking lot meetings. But these are all things that you can work on together. Any feedback on that, or examples from your own congregational situation?
I think the idea of having the consent calendar just solves a whole lot of problems.
Yes, it does.
And I would like to ask a question which doesn't really have to be answered in entirety, but maybe you could just give me a hint. At our church, we're talking about the possibility of becoming a mission. because of the financial situation. And some of the vestry members are concerned that the power of the vestry people will not be the same as it was if they're a vestry member or if they're a
Bishop's committee member.
co- bishop's committee. Yes. If there's something written down, just tell me where to find it. And
Well, so at a mission congregation, the bishop is your rector, and your vicar is her representative. In terms of the day-to-day activity of the vestry versus the bishop's committee, it's a fairly subtle difference. Because in fact, a lot of the things that people have done in the past as parishes, as vestries, like, sell properties or sign 100-year leases and stuff like that, you weren't supposed to be doing anyway. I don't mean you, but one wasn't supposed to be doing those things anyway. It was supposed to go to standing committee or executive council. So I don't think that most people are going to be able to tell us a real difference. Anyone here has served on both a vestry and a bishop's committee? Susan?
Yeah.
And what would you report? Do you think there's a
I don't know. I think it's very subtle, and I think that there are remnants of the past about vestries and what they can do and can't do. That you've already said, well, it shouldn't have been done anyway.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, I had one bishop who said, look, as far as I'm concerned, everybody's a priest in charge. And, I'm the one really in charge, whether it's a parish, a bishop's mission, or whatever it is. So takes us back to collaborative, I think, that we were talking about before.
Yes.
That it's a collaborative effort. And that's why we're there.
Thank you. Steve?
I've worked with bishops' committees, mission action parishes, and parishes, and they're pretty much the same. I'd like to advertise the fact that we are rolling out, standing committee is rolling out new templates for bylaws, and they, with Polly Getz's help, they're very similar between the two.
They really are.
And, we used those at All Saints when I was there, and it was wonderful. It was a super great help.
Yeah.
Marvelous, marvelous help.
So Helen, I hope that people will be at peace. I don't think they're going to experience a huge change in how they serve God in their church.
thank you.
The last thing I would like to talk just a minute about is mutual ministry. Your priests in charge, and I'll just say that rather than, vicar, rector, etc., and the governing body are supposed to do a mutual ministry review once a year. And there's a variety of ways to do that. You can have a very formal process. We have consultants who will come and work with you. Alan Dorsey, who's with us here, wave Alan, is one of them. And we have some others, people who will come and help facilitate that. But the heart of it is to once a year come together to say, how are we going to work together? Because it's not all up to your priest in charge, and it's not all up to your vestry either. It is collaborative. And when we can work collaboratively, we get a lot more accomplished. I'm going to share with you, and if you've ever been to one of my presentations, you will have seen this before. I'm going to share with you the mutual ministry document that we worked on at Grace Church in San Marcos when I was there. Now I was working, that's too big. I was working part-time, and so I was not able to do as many things as I might have done had I been full-time. So we, as a group, determined what are the responsibilities of the priest in charge. And you will see these. Some of them are, that was my job completely, preach. You'll notice worship with extensive collaboration. Oversee pastoral care, not do all of it. Administration, hold the people in prayer, keep parish records, lead vestry meetings, etc. Agenda with the vestry. This is what we came up with for what the vestry would do. Support the clergy, responsible for the budget and the finances, responsible for safety, strategy, property, listening to the congregation, being effective representatives. That harkens back to what Susan was talking about with being able to tell the congregation what is the financial situation. You know, if you've been in a congregation that has had financial trouble, that worry can be really deep. And the vestry, if that has improved, the vestry or bishops committee members need to get out there and be able to share that it's not the way it used to be. Or if things are really going down the tubes, to share that as well. Outreach, record keeping, agenda, communications, historical knowledge. That's important because, you know, clergy come and go, but parishes linger. And
That's the truth.
you know more than your priest in charge does, likely. And then the other thing that we did is we added what we thought the congregation's obligations were: attendance, participation, financial and emotional support, welcoming the stranger, coffee hour, prayer, outreach, ambassadors and evangelists. And I think this helped the whole congregation see us as a unit, as a
Body
group
of Christ.
that was, you know, the body of Christ. Yes, you know, it was not the Gwynn show. It wasn't all up to the senior warden. It was, we are all of us working together, and we can't do it without you, and we can't do it without you in the pews. So I encourage you, you know, a yearly retreat of some sort is a good time to work on things. Well, you could do, like I said, a formal mutual ministry review, but at the very least, you do want to do this kind of work every year. How are we going to do the work that is before us? What have we done well over the past year? What are the things that we still need to work on? So that's about as much Vestry 101 as I could fit in 45 minutes. So we have about 5 minutes left.
Can I say something, Gwen?
Sure.
Alan here. There's another thing that sometimes we do in the MMRs that I think is quite useful, especially when you've had a rotation on vestry for a couple of years and you have a vestry that maybe wasn't there 3 years ago when the rector was called, is that in executive session, we go through the rector's or the vicar's letter of agreement. And oftentimes there will be members of the vestry or the bishop's committee that have never seen that document, and they're really not aware of the responsibilities that they have in making sure that the rector is taking, they're setting aside money for sabbatical, that they are making sure that the rector is working that 40-hour week, right? and not 80-hour weeks, and getting some time off and taking some time for rest and relaxation and those sorts of things. And so I think that's an important part also. And it's really to remind the vestry of their responsibility of fulfilling their agreement with the priest that they have called.
Thank you. Nancy McLeese is mentioning that it is harder on Zoom. We haven't met in person since I joined. Yes. Bless you for starting in the midst of a pandemic. Yeah. It'll be interesting for you to actually get to sit in a room with people. Oh, Carlos, are you raising your hand?
Yeah. I just want to say thank you for this conversation. I think the consent agenda is the first time in my 21 years of ministry that I heard this, and I think it's fantastic. Something that I already, while we were talking, I had the agenda in my computer, and I put it already. I think it's wonderful. We have the same items, but as a separate item, each one of them. So
Right.
I think it is going to be save time just to have those consent things. It's fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, when I first learned it, which has not been all that long ago, it was with Episcopal Community Services when I served on the board there. That's the first time I had heard of it, and I was like, "Oh, well, that's a good idea." Oh shoot, I had something I was going to mention.
I certainly wish I'd had one all those years I was senior warden at St. John's.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That would have been wonderful.
Saves a lot of time. Yes, Steve, maybe I'll remember.
I just want to share, I noticed that the Manual of Business Affairs has been updated, a 2020 version, and it's in English and Spanish.
Okay.
And it's a PDF file, so you can send it out. It's handy for the finance committee, maybe treasurers and some vestry members to understand just how some of the paperwork and things of the church work. It's put out by the National Church. So it's been updated.
I just wanted to mention a true confession. You were talking about your congregation being called to be ambassadors and so forth. And this is going to be a challenge as we come back to in-person worship, because I know that standing in the parking lot for our, in-person worship, we were so glad to see each other and waving and elbow bumps and all this. And it wasn't until the end of the service that I realized that somebody in the next space, was new.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't said a word. And I finally did. But, I think we're all called to just be aware that there'll be new people there too.
And yes, it is going to be, we're going to have to stretch ourselves because we desperately need to hug our friends. We do.
We do.
And we also desperately need to welcome those who have joined us new. And we're just going to have to work harder.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you all for spending your evening with us this evening and with me. Like I said, I've given you my email address there. Please feel free to contact me with questions. If you have a vestry retreat or something coming up, We do have people that can assist you with that. Alan does that. I do that. Can you get copies of your documents? Yes. How am I going to, which one? Like the mutual ministry and the sample?
Well, if I email you, could you email me?
That'd be perfect.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Could I mention one thing? In our vestry meetings, at the end of our meetings, we always have reconciliation. And if ever anybody got their feelings hurt a little bit during the meeting or felt a little overwhelmed or whatever, they would come forward and we would resolve the situation and make sure everybody was happy before the end of the meeting. So it only took a couple of minutes and it was a great way to end the meeting.
That's cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. So, well, thank you all very much. I'm going to respect your time so I don't have to have a vote to extend it by 5 minutes. So go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Alleluia, alleluia.
Hallelujah.
Thanks a
Thank-
lot.
Thank you so much, Gwen.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.